Every single time we talk about KPIs, every single time we have our quarterly meetings or annual meetings, this is our scoreboard. This is what we're tracking. And the reason we chose profit is because we want you, our client or our owner, to make as much money as possible without like deferring maintenance over the long run. And so we felt like that massive gross profit distribution number being a target would help us align our interests with our owners. And hey, guess what? It aligns with my interest as a real estate owner myself as well. Right? So it works out pretty well that those are our goals.
All right, welcome back to another episode of the Hideaway Show. I'm joined today by an individual who played a major role in taking his property management company from $0 in revenue to over $4 million in less than 3 years, with just about $10 million in total cash received. I've got the co-founder and CEO of Renjoy joining us today, Jacob Mueller. Jacob, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Jordan. It's awesome to be here.
Yeah, it's a wild Tuesday. It's, as I was telling you before we hopped on, having a newborn really kind of changes things. He's less than a week old, so days are starting to blend together. Nights and days are starting to blend together. So I'm glad we were able to hop on and chat today. So
yeah, I totally understand that.
Kids are fun, man. But it'll be good. So, but cool. Well, I appreciate you hopping on today. So I wanted to start off by actually going in reverse and hearing a little bit more about your story of where you started and just understanding how you went from A to Z and really getting to this point of being in short-term rentals, property management itself, and getting to the point of owning Renjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be honest, I won't bore your audience with like the full background story, but one thing that I do think is important, and it's been a part of my professional journey and my personal journey too, is that I've highly valued autonomy. And so in my professional path, I've kind of navigated towards opportunities that provided autonomy. And recently, and probably for the rest of my career, I landed on probably the most powerful, profession, industry that allows for autonomy in an individual's life, which is real estate. I mean, it's unbelievable the different ways that real estate can create space, autonomy, freedom in your life. It's just mind blowing. And I run into people every day like yourself, Jordan, who are doing it in a different way that's new. And it's always just exciting to see that. But I've never seen an industry quite like real estate to provide that autonomy. But as far as like my actual real estate career goes, I started about 4 years ago as a commercial real estate agent. I was doing leasing. I learned that was not what I wanted to do. I was in it for about 3-4 months, making 300-400 cold calls a day, like on my own, just grinding. Started having some success in the industry, and then immediately, boom, got laid off because the firm I was with was a boutique firm, and the partners were having an argument, which I didn't know, and went their different ways. So there I am, 3 months in, finally starting to get a little bit of traction as a leasing agent, thinking, okay, great, what do I do now? And I found a real estate investment company that I went to work for out of Denver called Atlas Real Estate. Great crew. If you're ever looking to do some like large multifamily deals or some really competent property managers in the long-term rental space, Atlas Real Estate is definitely somebody you should check out. So I worked with them. I learned a ton from them, both as a real estate agent, helping investors acquire long-term rentals, but also how to renovate them, how to operate them. I learned a lot about investing myself personally. It's where I learned how to start doing fix and flips. It's where I started building my own personal portfolio. And through that process, I came into contact with a couple of guys who turned out to be really sharp. And I saw them at the time as a real estate broker as, just clients to close the next deal with. They were really good investors, and they were in a particular segment, which you're in, and probably most of your audience is in, which is short-term rentals. And I started learning a ton from these guys, seeing what they were doing from the broker side. Remember, I was their agent, and I was watching what they were doing. I'm like, these guys are buying a property every 6 months. Like, how are they doing this? Like, how is this possible? And so I got to know them, became friends, and over time, I eventually jumped ship from Atlas to start Renjoy, which is a short-term rental property management company. We started it about 2.5-3 years ago. And since then, it's kind of been a wild ride. And that's how I ended up where I am now.
That's incredible. And so Renjoy, how many properties do you guys manage to date?
I think we're in the high hundreds. I think we're on like 170.
Oh, wow. Okay. Gotcha. And you guys are based out of Colorado, is that correct?
Yeah, we're based out of Colorado, but we also started operating in Florida.
Nice. Okay, so you're in Colorado, Florida. Any other markets that Renjoy taps into?
Not one we advertise, but we do have some exposure to Arizona. but that
Gotcha.
is not something we are actively growing.
Gotcha. Okay. So with so those two individuals that you were referring to, are those the two that you've partnered with and built Renjoy with?
Yeah, that's right. Luke and Michael.
Nice. Very nice. Well, cool, man. So Renjoy itself, that we've talked about this before, and the property management companies are, everywhere you turn. Some are great, some are you question how they're able to manage property in the first place, let alone their own property. But tell us a little bit about, what does Renjoy do as a property management company for host better than other companies? What's one thing that stands out about Renjoy that you can speak to?
Sure. Yeah. To answer that question about the one thing that kind of, we think makes us stand out, I do want to kind of comment on your comments about property managers. It's definitely true that the level of expertise within property managers, this is true for long-term rentals as well as short-terms, but the level of expertise from one manager to another is massive. Honestly, the reason why we founded Renjoy was actually because I couldn't find a property manager in my market where my short-term rental assets were that I trusted. I literally went and interviewed half a dozen of them in my market. I'm like, none of you guys are ready to do this at the level that I want it to be done. So I guess I'll do it myself. So what makes us different though from other property managers is that investor mindset. I mentioned we manage about 170-ish properties. Well, 30 of those are my own, me and my partners. And so we don't treat our properties differently than our clients on purpose. So all of a sudden, we have this understanding of what our owners are going through because we see it on our owner statements. We see it on our properties. We see how cleaning is being done. We see how maintenance is being done. We see how the property management fees are being charged because we treat ourselves the same as clients. That's been a huge difference between us and a lot of other property managers. I will say that quite a few managers maybe own one or two properties in the portfolio that they manage, but it's very rare that they're, almost a quarter of the entire portfolio.
So the benefit is that within your guys' portfolio of properties you manage, like you said, 30 of them are yours. And not to say that you would care more about your properties than anyone else's, but I think there's a human psychology to where what is yours, you tend to give a little, I shouldn't say more attention to, but there's, if you just are managing other people's properties, I think there's a risk that it becomes just very much just like a business, like hitting certain numbers versus actually caring about. I think there's customer service that really plays into an effective property manager or just managing a property in general. Customer service, customer experience, that whole thing. There has to be someone behind that actually cares versus just sending automated messages and not getting any thought or effort.
Yeah, so there's a couple of things on this that I would touch. One of the things that we founded our company upon, because we obviously are very familiar with real estate, we're very familiar with property management businesses. To some degree, there's you're never going to be able to, one of the reasons why people hate property managers or why it's such a messy relationship is because there's nothing you can do about the fact that you're going to have conflicts of interests between your owners. There's fundamentally within the business model, no way to break this problem of a conflict of interest between a property manager and an owner. Now you can align some interests. In fact, lots of interests are aligned. For instance, you charge a commission on the rent you actually receive. So now you're motivated to go and get income for your property owner. That's great, but there's still a lot of conflict and you can't remove all of it. So one of the things that we set out to do is align that interest as much as possible. And we set our company up to achieve two things. If we're successful, we will do these things. One of those things is to serve at least 1,000 owners. So we want to serve at least 1,000 people. And we define that service as actually enabling passive income. Because as you know, Jordan, with short-term rentals, there is a tremendous amount of activity you have to do. Even when you hire a manager, you still have to do a lot of stuff. And I'm sure your audience can relate to that. So that's one goal of our company. The second is very important. And that is we want to distribute at least $200 million in profits to our owners. And we chose that number really specifically. And those are our two guiding lights. Every single time we talk about KPIs, every single time we have our quarterly meetings or annual meetings, this is our scoreboard. This is what we're tracking. And the reason we chose profit is because we want you, our client or our owner, to make as much money as possible without deferring maintenance over the long run. And so we felt like that massive gross profit distribution number being a target would help us align our interests with our owners. And hey, guess what? It aligns with my interest as a real estate owner myself as well. Right? So it works out pretty well that those are our goals. One other comment I did want to make about owning your own properties and like paying attention to your property more than clients, because I think this is really important as well. I actually intentionally remove myself from the operation of my properties. So when our guest communications team is messaging a guest at one of my properties, or they're assigning a work order for a maintenance item at one of my properties, I intentionally don't look at those, don't get involved in those, and try actively to not be involved, because I want to see what that feels like as an owner who doesn't have necessarily this inside baseball view of what's going on. I want to get the owner's statement and be like, oh, they charged me for this thing. Oh, and they charged me for this thing. And oh, they charged me for this thing. Why would we do this? And I want to actually have that same experience my owners have. And so there actually is a pretty big separation between my role in the company at Renjoy and how my properties are being operated.
Yeah, I think that makes sense, because by doing that, you get to have a perspective from your client's perspective, right? You get to see and experience what they're experiencing. And I'm sure you've done that and come across things, and you've got like feedback like, okay, we can tweak this now that, on the other side of the fence, you didn't even realize it was there, but then you put yourself in the client's shoes. You're like, oh my, like it always seems like it's just glaring you right in the face. I know we've had in our business where we're looking at it, and it's like, take off this set of lenses and try to think about it from a guest perspective. It's like, oh my gosh, like why were we doing that? That made no sense. Let's adjust, or let's pivot.
Can I share an example of how this actually is played out in real life?
Absolutely. I'd love that.
Okay. So owner statements, you probably feel this, owners, if you have managers, or even if you're just running your own properties, you have an issue. You hire a third-party handyman to come take care of your issue, whatever. They charge you $85 and it takes them 20 minutes, 15 minutes, whatever. They charge you a minimum, $85. And we were doing this as a property manager. It's much, much simpler and easier for me on my business side to just like hire these third-party contractors to send them out and dispatch them to resolve your issues, and then just bill you the expense on your owner statement. Very easy to do, I, as an owner, was seeing my maintenance costs just mounting. I was like, holy cow, maintenance is a massive drag on my profit. And I was seeing that as an owner. I'm like, what can we do about this? And from seeing that as an owner, seeing that maintenance costs were just ridiculously expensive, especially for short-term rentals where you have to send out people for really small stuff, which you normally wouldn't do with a long-term rental. After seeing that, we decided, hey, what would it look like for us to actually bring maintenance in-house? And we brought maintenance in-house. We have 4 technicians who work for us full-time. We're dispatching them, we pay them, and we're able to bill our owners with a plan that is actually cost-effective, because we know exactly how much work we're doing. We know exactly which properties need the work and when they need it. And we have an exact flow of work orders and preventative maintenance too that we know we're going to have to achieve. But by bringing maintenance in-house, we reduced the overall maintenance burden of the portfolio under management, not just our properties, but all of our owners, by more than 30%. So when we talk about driving profit to our owners, this is a perfect example of how we discovered a way to drive profit to our owners by seeing it and experiencing it ourselves, of feeling like maintenance is a problem. We need to solve this problem. And by doing that, we drove down cost 30% for the whole portfolio.
That's incredible. And with that, so you brought them in-house. What was that process like of bringing them in-house? Was it like, did you have 4, I'll use the term handyman. I know some people like it, some don't, but 4 handyman or 4 maintenance individuals that were there. And did you identify them and like, these guys are the best, let's bring them in-house? Or how did that process work?
Yeah, that's a good question, Jordan. It wasn't like all at once, right? Because we're a growing company, right? So it's not as if we had enough work for 4 full-time technicians when we first brought it in-house. But what I would say is when we first started, we were kind of looking for individuals who were really competent in a wide range of skills so that we could dispatch them to do any task. But as we've grown and become a little bit more, I would say, efficient and effective, we actually have different handymen who have different skill rankings on different tasks. So we actually have a matrix within our dispatch that our dispatch team uses. And in that matrix, we have a set of, I think, like 16 to 20 skills. And each technician is ranked 1 to 5 on those skills. And dispatch uses that to decide which technician am I sending for which job. So for instance, we have one technician, Davis, who's very good with appliances. So it's almost always the case when we have an appliance issue that we dispatch Davis to solve that issue, because he's going to solve it faster. He's going to troubleshoot it faster. He's just going to get it all done faster, which drives profit to our owners. And normally what you would have to do is you'd have to hire a specialized third-party company that does appliance repair. And guess what? they bill at a higher rate than your average handyman. Well, for us, we don't actually charge at a higher rate. We just charge a flat handyman service, but you're getting more specialized skills.
That's awesome. Because I think it's a pain point many people have is when issues do arise, they have a laundry list of people to call, but it's a laundry list of companies to call, right? It's the appliance company, it's the handyman, it's the plumber, it's the electrician, it's this, and they're companies. And a lot of times it's you don't know who you're going to get, you don't know when you'll get on their schedule, things like that. So I think bringing them in-house is definitely valuable. I know a lot of people focus initially on bringing their cleaning team in-house. Is your cleaning team in-house as well, or how does that work?
Yeah, so cleaning is a little bit complicated, but yes, it is primarily in-house now.
Yes.
That transition was very painful, and actually something your audience will really want to understand when interviewing a property manager is not just understand, where the property manager is currently with their cleaning and how they approach it, but also where they're going with it. Because if you're going to be with a property manager through their transition from outside third-party 1099s through the transition to internal cleaners, you're going to want to be really like paying attention as an owner, because that transition is very painful. And I'll be honest with you. I mean, I'll play inside baseball all day long, Jordan, because I think one of the big problems with property management is there's just very low transparency with owners, or accountability in some ways. And so I'll tell you all the inside baseball for property managers. But one of the things that we struggled with was transitioning from 1099s to W-2 cleaners. And our guest experience plummeted really for about 3 months there as we went through that transition. It was very painful. We're back on track. Things are, improving and are going to be better than they were. But as you probably know with business, like you go up, and in order to go to the next level, you have to go down for a little bit to go back up. And it didn't hurt our revenue. So our owners weren't really feeling it from a distribution perspective, but it was unsustainable, the quality decrease for our guests. And so the reason why I bring this all up is because those transitions are very hard for property managers. And you want to make sure as an owner that you're paying attention to those transitions.
Hey guys, real quick, the only way we can continue to grow this show to bring on bigger and better guests is if you guys rate, review, and share the show. So, if you could take 2 seconds and leave us a quick 5-star review on Apple or Spotify, it would mean the world to us. But even better than that, we'll be able to reach more real estate investors and help them build out their dreams through unique short-term rentals. Now back to the show.
So we've talked about cleaning, we've talked about the maintenance team. One thing I wanted to ask you, and it's something we stress to our audience and our community, is this concept of continuously standing out in this world, this industry of short-term rentals. Because as you know, short-term rentals are growing daily. The main markets, people throw out the term saturation, all this stuff. And what we preach is to be able to stand out, you have to rise to the top. You need to be that top 5 or 10% within your industry. And a lot of times that requires either, a fresh design, new amenities to make you stand out, something in the property that makes you stand out from the property down the street or across town. Like, why would they come and stay at your place when you had the exact same amenities, the exact same design as the property across the road? And then it becomes this concept of, okay, well, if they're the exact same, then how do I choose which property to go to? A lot of times it then becomes a point of price. This one's $200 a night. This one's $175 a night. Everything else is the same. Reviews are similar. I would be foolish not to go with $175. So my question for you as a property management company, do you help your owners in coming up with ideas or recommendations on how to improve their properties or make their property stand out? Or how does that process work?
Great question. So yes, of course, we do consult with our owners and make recommendations, but we even go a step further and we actually require a lot. Many property managers obviously make money as soon as they sign on a property, and so they don't really care about the quality of the property they're bringing on. But we actually do have a pretty strict requirements list in terms of the amenities you have to have on your properties. Now, we're not quite at the level of like a luxury property manager where they require everybody to have a hot tub, they require you to have a pool, they require you to have a sauna, they require you to have all these things. We're not quite at that level, but we definitely do require all these little smaller, more affordable amenities like a pack and play for a kiddo and a high chair and kid utensils and things that lots of homeowners don't think about when they launch their Airbnb. We do require quite a few of those things. And so that kind of helps get your property to stand out. And I do actually want to talk about this in a couple of ways. So yes, you want to make your property unique and stand out. That's part of the goal. The other part of the goal is how do you approach demand in your market? And approaching demand has two kind of facets. You can focus on capturing existing demand in your market. This is travelers who are coming to your market to stay in an Airbnb. They're coming. Your goal is to capture them. Okay. They're already coming. They already have whatever. You want to capture them. The second component, which is very, very important, and I think a vast majority of owner operators can't really do effectively, is what we call generating demand. This is contacting people through marketing methods to get them to stay in your market, in your property, who wouldn't otherwise be in your marketplace. That demand generation is basically impossible if you're an individual owner operator. You just don't have the scale. You don't have the means to do it. You don't have the budget for it. Very difficult to do. And one of the things that's very important in a property manager is making sure they're not only really good at capturing existing demand by having a top 10% listing, like you mentioned, but also really good at generating demand to supplement your listing, to generate revenue. Right? The goal here is to generate as much revenue as possible.
So in generating, and that's interesting because that's something that we do a lot of. And one of our strategies for doing this is obviously the email list, email capture, and email marketing campaigns. But then also one of the things that we do heavily within the unique space is having a social media presence, really capturing this concept. And I think this is where unique stays and maybe even more experiential stays are kind of paving the way in a sense for the short-term rental industry, where you take people. I always use this example of like someone scrolling through Instagram or TikTok or whatever, and they come across a property and it says, let's just use Kentucky, for example, because that's where our properties are. And they go, oh my gosh, like I've never had a need or desire to ever go to Kentucky, but I have now come across this property that is in Kentucky, and oh my gosh, I need to go there. At that point, what they're doing is they're not just looking for a place to lay their head while they're staying in that area. What they're doing is they're coming to your place intentionally to experience your property. Oh, and by the way, it's in a cool area that has hiking, restaurants, tourist attraction sites, things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think unique stays, what I would say about unique stays, you're likely going to drive substantially higher revenue per square foot than basically any other real estate asset class. The challenge with unique stays, though, is that it's not much of a commodity, right? It's much more illiquid. It's much more specialized. And we actually, to make what we do more accessible, we definitely don't expect our owners to make their like 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in the middle of Colorado Springs. We don't expect them to make that a destination. Like nobody's going to come to your place because you have a pickleball court in your yard. Like it's not that exciting for where we are and what guests are doing. We focus much more heavily on the commodity side of short-term rentals. And how do you stand out on the commodity side? Because there's a tremendous amount of demand there. What you're talking about is, I think, another section of the space on those unique stays. And I would venture that a lot of your audience are going to be more on the commodity side than they are on the unique stay. And if you're on the unique stay side, you should probably not hire a manager. Like you should probably run ops yourself.
Yeah. And I do think there's almost this middle ground, right? Where you're saying like the commodity stays, the unique stays, but then there's almost this, and I think, correct if I'm wrong, there's maybe even some properties that you guys own and manage that's kind of in between, where it's unique in the sense that it stands out. There's something about the property that allows it to stand out. It's not a treehouse. It's not a cave in Ohio. It's not something on stilts overlooking a river that's just unlike anything anyone else has seen before. I think everyone can define their own term of unique and what unique actually means. It doesn't, we always tell people this, it doesn't mean you have to go out and spend $500,000 on a cave house that you have no experience in building. There's other ways to be unique and stand out. And I heard this on a podcast the other day where instead of looking forward to scale and add more doors, consider looking backwards at your properties and finding ways to in fact stand out, add amenities, increase the design. Like look at your current portfolio and figure out like, how can I maximize my ROI on my properties by making it more unique? And by being unique, maybe that's, like I said, adding an amenity that's not within your market, or adding, upgrading your design that's something slightly different than what's in the market. It's still appealing to the audience that's going there, but allows you when guests are scrolling through Airbnb, VRBO, Booking.com, wherever it may be, they stop. They see your space over everyone else's. Everyone else has the same outdoor shot, but you have slightly different photography. You have a slightly different cover photo. You have all these different components that are slightly different that captures their attention. And it's what we call the thumb stop ratio. You want to maximize your thumb stop ratio to get people to stop on that listing and be like, interesting, and click onto it and then get into the listing, versus it just looking like everyone else and hopefully they stop on yours.
Yeah, I think you're hitting a nail on the head. I don't know how I would think about it in terms of like the spectrum of unique stays to like commodity stays. But you're absolutely right about this thumb stop idea. I like that. And I think one of the main ways you do that is lots of people get confused, I think, with short-term rentals and designing beautiful houses and designing beautiful spaces. And they equate that the same thing as what you're saying, which it is not the same thing. Because there can be a lot of beautiful properties, but if they're not unique in the way that people who are on these apps that are flipping through them looking for unique, they're not going to stand out. So it's not quite the same as just having a beautiful house. I think it goes far beyond that.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of flexibility, because unique in, let's use a more mature market, the Gatlinburg. There's tons of properties there. To be unique and stand out, the bar has been raised so high. Like you're really going to have to do a lot to stand out versus other markets that maybe are, on the rise or coming up. There's not as much that you would need to do to stand out. Not to say that you should, go for something, simple and not as unique, but the bar is a lot lower to be able to be unique and stand out and stay ahead of that market to where people desire going to your place over 10 other places within that market.
What you're describing, Jordan, does not sound like passive income to me. It sounds like you have to look at your listing every other year and make improvements in order to stay on top of it.
Yeah, what I think there is a component of, it's this is who, not how, like finding, building a team around you that can maybe help out with this, whether that be you, whether that be you partnering with someone else to help do that work. We at at Build Your Hideaway in our company, we don't use the term passive income very much just because, as you've stated in the beginning, it is a very active industry. There's a lot that goes into it. There's a lot of components that need to be checked. I think though, where a lot of people, if they don't do it right, can get burnt out and just wash out of the industry is if they just continue doing things manually themselves and they don't pivot and they adjust, or they don't realize that it's a good time to switch, which made me think of this as question for you is when a person does get to that point, they're like, okay, like I've optimized this as much as I possibly think I can. I'm now getting overwhelmed. I'm getting consumed. I don't know where to go from here. How does that person know to go, okay, I should look into a property management company? Like, is there a point in time or is there something that they should be looking for that says like, okay, now is a good time for me to switch?
Yeah, that's a great question. Man, people come to us from a lot of different places. I don't know that I have seen a strong enough pattern to really answer your question well, to be honest. I think there's a lot of things that go into this. I can use some rules of thumb. In our experience, generally, once you get past, like people will call us and say, hey, I got this Airbnb, I want to run it, don't really know what I'm doing, or like, I know what I'm doing, or something like that, but it's my first one, and I want to hire you. And we often say, hey, if this is your first Airbnb, don't hire us, don't hire any manager, do it yourself, learn a little bit about what this business is so that you can interview a manager. Because if you pick the wrong manager, it is a very expensive problem. And to switch, right? If you're with a bad manager, it is a huge cost to switch to a new manager in just a lot of different ways, not necessarily just monetary, but in just a lot of ways. And so when somebody calls in their first Airbnb, unless there's some very specific reason that they can't be available like 24/7 to communicate with guests, which happens a lot in our market because there's a lot of military folks here and they're on base and don't have, cell service for a lot of the daylight hours. Unless you have a really specific reason like that, you should run your own Airbnb. But then what we see is oftentimes when you get to about 3 to 7, and on the 3 side of that, now it becomes, hey, this is like, 20 hours a week of work. I mean, and consistently. It's not like every once in a while I have 20 hours a week. It's like every week I've got 20 hours and you're on vacation and you're still responding to guests. You can never really shut it off because it's really hard to be like, hey neighbor, can you just like message my guests for me while I'm on vacation and like solve any problems that might come up? It's like a really big thing to try to hand off temporarily. And so that's where I see a lot of people get burnt out is like, man, I have to constantly be responding to guests and there's no escaping from it unless I just block my calendar while I'm on vacation. That's the only solution. And so if you're at that point where you're blocking your calendar because you don't want to deal with the work of your Airbnb, that is a really good indicator that you should consider hiring a manager because you have this vacancy that you shouldn't really have.
Right. And I do think the industry itself, I go back to, I never owned an Airbnb during the peak of COVID, I would say 2020. But what I will say is the space itself from looking back then to where it is now, is definitely professionalizing even more. I know people for a long time have preached, you got to treat your Airbnb, your short-term rentals as a business. And like, I think some people get that. And there was a little bit of leeway for a couple of years where people are like, I treat it as a business, right? And they're not really treating it as a business. But over the last couple of years, I think it's kind of forced some host hands who are like, wow, like the space is professionalizing. Like I'm not doing enough to stand out. I'm not generating enough revenue on my properties. My bookings have went down. Like during COVID, I could just, buy, put a mattress in a room with a couch from the thrift store, and I was printing money, right? And that this industry itself is professionalizing. And I'm curious to know your thoughts and your take on that of, do you see the same thing where hosts are coming to you and being like, hey, Jacob, I'm struggling over here, right? I got 3 properties, I got 4 properties. They're just not doing well. I don't know any more than I know today. I picked this up as a side hustle to generate some additional income. Help me out. Are you seeing that from your end as well?
Oh, yeah. Definitely seeing a lot of fatigue in the industry in general. And a lot of those homeowners go a couple of different directions. Either they turn them into long-term rentals or they sell them or they contact a manager. So I'm definitely seeing a lot of fatigue from people who jumped in during kind of peak zero interest rate policy era. Definitely see a lot of that. I 100% wholeheartedly agree that the industry is professionalizing. I mean, if I didn't believe it, I wouldn't have started a short-term rental management company. But I suspect in the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be even more professionalized. And there's a couple of reasons for that. And I think it's important to kind of go back on something I mentioned earlier on the demand thing, where there's 2 components, right? Capturing existing demand and generating demand. One of the things that we see, at least in our core marketplace of Colorado Springs, is that we don't necessarily need our owners to constantly improve their properties every couple of years to like keep up with the amenity attrition war, like the Cold War, between all these listings trying to constantly outperform each other in terms of like amenities. I don't think that's sufficient to stand out. I actually think you have to be way more savvy with your pricing strategy and your distribution of your listing. How many people are seeing your property? And I think that that's a complicated issue for individual homeowners to tackle. And the reason why I bring this up in the context of professionalization is you're starting to see, for example, Marriott come into this. We have a partnership with Marriott, like many larger property managers do on their Homes and Villas program. You're never going to get on that as an individual. You can't. And we're already seeing substantially higher RevPAR or revenue, right, per available night on those listings than you see on like a normal booking for that property. I mean, we're seeing like a 10 to 15% higher RevPAR on every Marriott booking. And the reason is that people can use points. They can use their Marriott points on our properties. Individual homeowners can't do that. So how are they going to compete? How are they going to compete with us? That's just one example. There's a lot of things that we do. For instance, when we name our listings, we actually use a 2-word naming system. For instance, I think we just had a new house and cottage come online. I think it's like Emerald Cottage and Emerald Sky or something like that. But by using those 2 unique names, it allows savvy guests who are on Airbnb looking for properties to actually find us off Airbnb. So they see Emerald Sky. Well, they go to Google and they type Emerald Sky. They're going to find our direct booking right there. And there's going to be a lot of stuff like that individual homeowners just either don't have the time or the knowledge to tackle themselves. And I think you're going to see this actually compound with the advancement of AI in a lot of different facets of short-term rental management and operations. I think you're going to see kind of that professionalization actually accelerate.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. I think a lot of people spend a lot of times with their short-term rentals focusing on, listing optimization for Airbnb. And I'm not to say that that's not important, but a lot of the, short-term rental hosts out there are focusing on that primarily. It's like, I need to go all in on Airbnb. I need to focus on my naming, my pricing. I need to rank on page 1. Like I see people just obsess over their page ranking, and page ranking, don't get me wrong, is definitely important. But if you're only focusing on that, I think you're selling yourself short with what you can do with your property. I love what you mentioned. More eyes and attention on your property, more people that see your property, more places that your property is in front of a potential guest that's going to book your stay, whether that be direct, whether it be Google search, social media, email marketing, Marriott, whatever it may be. You're expanding your audience from what, only Airbnb and VRBO provide to the vast majority of the entire country.
Yeah. I mean, it's about maximizing your impressions and maximizing your conversion rate from impressions to reservations. And frankly, Airbnb does not have the whole market, right? I think a lot of people just kind of assume everybody books on Airbnb like it's 90% of the market. It is not. And in fact, we're seeing a lot of risk with people who are Airbnb exclusively with a lot of their new policies recently, where people get delisted if they have multiple issues, even over our 6-month period. We've seen, Jordan, this is crazy. We've seen listings that have, let's say, an air conditioning issue in May of this year. AC issue, guest reported, don't have it, whatever. We literally fix it the next day. We have a report that's fixed. You send it into Airbnb. You have another, let's say, another issue that's unrelated to that same AC issue 2-3 months later. So in July, you have another AC issue. You add, you fix it. And then in August, let's say you have a pest issue. You just have a bunch of bugs or something that gets reported. Airbnb will delist you, even though you have solved the problem each time quickly and effectively. They'll still delist you for a week or two. All of a sudden, your platform's not even there anymore. So guess how many impressions you get? 0. So I think there's actually a tremendous amount of risk for individual owner operators that they don't even really understand because they're single platform.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the benefit of a property management company versus someone who doesn't know what they're, I guess a host who says, okay, well, great. I want to expand my reach. I want more people to see my place. I need a direct booking site. I need to start capturing email. And what I've seen, and I'm curious your take on this, I've seen a lot of people spin up a direct booking site, capture email, and they're like, what? I'm not getting any direct bookings. I have the direct booking site. I have the emails. What's going on? Why is no one going and booking my stay?
Yeah.
So your take on that, why are those people falling short? I have my own opinion on that, but I'm curious on yours.
Well, a couple of things. One, you're competing with us, right? Like, and we have tons of people and resources and like a portfolio. We have scale, right? If you're trying to compete with our marketing, like you're going to get crushed just because you don't have the cash. I mean, we'll do over $10 million in collections this year, right? And over $4 million in revenue as a business. Like, even if we're allocating the same percentage of that revenue towards marketing efforts as you do as the individual owner operator, our impact or the effectiveness of every dollar we pour into advertising will be greater than yours as an owner operator. And as an owner operator, you have very limited time. It's not like this is your full-time gig. Like, you probably have a job and you may have a couple of Airbnbs that do some income, but this is like a side thing. Not only do you have to do 24/7 guest communications, you have to respond to guests quickly and promptly. You have to be doing dispatch for all your maintenance and cleaning issues. You have to be constantly looking for vendors to solve your problem because housekeepers aren't the most reliable, and you have to constantly replace them when they go on vacation or they get sick. So you have to have like a whole, queue of cleaners to take care of it. And then on top of that, you're talking about running a marketing campaign regularly. You're talking about capturing guest emails. You're talking about driving traffic to a direct booking site in the massively competitive direct booking space with like Airbnb and Booking.com. You're never going to compete with those guys on a Google pay-per-click ad campaign or anything like that. That's like the wrong approach. Then to even learn how to do these things effectively is a massive amount of time. I just don't see a world in which an owner operator can compete. I just don't see it.
Yeah. And that's where I'm seeing as well as people are unfortunately falling short is the assumption is direct book, they don't understand SEO. They don't understand marketing campaigns. They understand one component of it, that they need a direct booking site and they need to capture emails. But then there's 100 steps after that need to take place on top of that to essentially convert those impressions and that traffic into someone who is a paying guest, someone who is booking your stay.
You're also making a pretty big assumption that the people who stay at your property are going to want to stay at the exact same property. This is the other big thing.
Right.
You don't have anything to sell. So in my world, right, where you're very commoditized, we almost have no repeat guests, right? At the same property. We have a ton of repeat guests within the portfolio, but not at the same property. Because somebody could stay at property A one day and say like, hey, this is amazing. Whenever we're back in town, we want to stay here again. We're like, cool, you're never going to stay here again, but hey, here's another similar property in this other place that you might actually like next time you're in Colorado. And they'd book it, right? But it's not the same place. When you are an individual owner operator, you're trying to get somebody to come back to the same property over and over. You know how hard that is, right? When you're not, unless you're like you have a unique stay that's like really exceptional, or you're in an amazing vacation market where people just go to the same place every year, which is not us. Unless you have one of those two things, trying to drive repeat bookings is really probably the most inefficient thing you should be doing or could be doing. in terms of driving net new or driving revenue.
Yep, I totally agree. And everyone talks about repeat guesses being like the keys to the kingdom on increasing revenue, and it's so challenging. Like you're saying, on a commodity property that they're never going to come back to. They more so maybe came to that property while they were passing through the town, or they're only going to come to that area once, and they're not coming back for another 10 or 12 years. And what's the likelihood that you still own that property in 10 to 12 years, right? Or that property's still there. I think that is a very real, that's very real in the state of the industry today.
Yeah, I definitely think it's true. And I do want to say one thing going back to the professionalization that I think is really important, and we'll come back to this topic because I think I have another thing to comment on there. But as far as like the professionalization goes, the quiet part out loud that I'm not saying of like why I started Renjoy is because I saw the writing on the wall. I was like, I cannot continue to operate these properties with where this industry is going unless I do one of two things. Either I hire a property manager who's going to grow and scale, that it's going to allow my properties to compete, or I go into this full-time myself personally, and I'm just doing everything myself, and I'm full-time. I saw that, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, 3 years ago. I was like, this is going to be so hard to compete. And I think it can be done. I want to kind of take a little bit of a step back from my statement of the owner operators can't compete. I just think you can, but it's just really, really difficult to stand out and compete just because of the time constraints. And on the return bookings, this leads to a really interesting insight that I think a lot of people in our industry, in the short-term rental industry, homeowners in particular, don't necessarily understand. People talk about reviews as if that's the holy grail. But for me as an investor, my goal is not people to love me or love my property. My goal is to make as much money as possible over the longest time period possible, right? That's my objective as an investor. And people talk about reviews as if they're the same thing as revenue, and they are not. While they are correlated, they're not the exact same. And the reason why this matters a lot is because of this concept of whether guests are coming back to rebook your place. If you're a unique stay, or you're in a highly desirable vacation market that people come to year after year, in those cases, I think your guest reviews matter a ton. If you're a commodity and people are going to stay with you once and probably never come to that city again, or come to that city once every 10 years or whatever, your reviews, while they matter, don't need to be nearly as high caliber as they do in other markets or with unique stays to drive that return guest booking, because these guests are going to come back. And so do they have to have this incredible experience where they feel like they got a tremendous deal by staying with you and paying $100 a night or $1,000 a night? Or do you just need them to basically generate as much profit as possible and have a reasonably good experience so that others, when they look at that experience, aren't detracted from your listing? And I think a lot of people don't understand that correlation between review and revenue within the context of, am I a commodity or am I a unique stay? And driving my own revenue for the most part, driving my own demand.
Yeah, I do think that the piece of correlation between review and revenue is crucial, because I think, to your point on reviews are very critical, because we value reviews a ton. And as you said, we should, because we are in this unique stay space where it's like, we want people to look at our properties like, oh my gosh, like I need to go experience that. I need to have that experience. Versus I think about when I traveled, for example, we went to Kansas City one year and we needed a place to stay. And it was very much like we looked around for a day or two, we found a property, and it's like, great, it looked nice. And, went there and had a great experience. They went up and beyond, did some things that really stood out. And when I left, I'm like, man, next time we're in Kansas City, we're staying here again. And guess what? We haven't stayed there again.
If you ever go back,
it hasn't happened. And that's not to say that's every guest, but I think that's exactly what you're saying is, those guests are, either moving on, or they're going to find another place, or unfortunately they're going to not necessarily forget about you, but they're going to go stay somewhere else. Right.
Yeah.
They have another reason why they're in town.
That's right. I think I want to add a little bit of nuance too, just so people understand what I'm saying. Because I'm not saying that reviews don't matter and guest experience doesn't matter. That's not what I'm saying. But what I am saying is that if we get 5 stars out of 5 stars on value by every guest every time, we're underpriced. We're underpriced. And what we want to do is we want people to be like, yeah, I had a great stay, but I definitely paid for it. I definitely, I didn't feel like I got a great deal. And we don't want people to feel like they got a great deal, because that means we underpriced. And that's kind of more what I mean, where you get kind of those dings on your reviews. Is somebody will say on the value category of Airbnb, they break down the reviews this way. Not every platform does, but on Airbnb, guests will review different aspects of their stay. And the value one is the one we're like really paying attention to, or sorry, rather one we don't really care about getting 5 stars on. We want that to be 3 or 4 stars on value, because we want to basically drive as much profit on that stay as possible. And so I think I want to add that, a little bit of that nuance here.
Yeah, no, I think that totally makes sense. And it's one of those where, they're going to give you a 5 on value if they're like, oh my gosh, like I got a 6-bedroom place for $100 a night. Like, you are definitely underpriced, versus like if, people are paying, like you're going to get a lot of people out there and be like, I didn't feel like I should have paid X amount to come stay at that place. And that's where they're like, everything else was great, but like, I think I overpaid. And that's where you can see that value start to dip. But, overall on Airbnb, you will see the overall 5 stars really what guests are seeing. Obviously, you can now click into each of the individual categories, but I totally agree.
Yeah, I guess they're mostly looking at kind of that initial screen of like,
Right.
hey, is this a super host? Is this high enough? Like my wife and I have talked about this because I've asked her, because I'm just super curious. I'm like, hey, babe, when you're looking at Airbnbs, like what do you kind of like scan for? She's like, well, they have to be super hosts. They kind of have to be over a 485. As long as they're over 485, if it's a beautiful property, I'll book it. I don't really care if they're a 499. Like, that doesn't matter to me.
Right.
And so I think a lot of people don't realize that.
Yep. No, absolutely. So I want to not necessarily shift, but you mentioned this earlier about where the industry is going. You said like in the next 5 to 10 years. I'm curious, where do you see the industry of short-term rentals going in the next 5 years? Like, where will short-term rentals be from your perspective?
Man, that's very hard to say, to be honest. I can speak in like broad strokes. I think you're gonna see. Like we've mentioned, the professionalization of the industry. I think you're going to see the next 5 to 10 years. You're gonna actually see a vacation rental REIT come into existence. I think you're gonna see institutional capital really kind of get into this game. And part of that's going to drive that professionalization that we're talking about. I mean, heck, I had a guy reach out last week who has like a prop co and an opco. He's private equity backed, and he's basically kind of like buying up these vacation rental management companies to create 2 different businesses. One, a holding company of the real estate that the management company runs, and then the operating company is kind of another version of that. And he's going to basically grow it and roll it and then sell it to like a larger institutional fund. I mean, it's very similar. Like, if you're familiar with like TechVestor, kind of what they're doing and others in that space, I think you're going to see more of that. I think there's always going to be a niche for individual owner operators. I do think that that's going to exist. I think this idea of like of a human touch where you're actually talking to the host, you're actually like involved and have somewhat of a quasi relationship with your host. I think that there's going to be a segment of the market that's always that way. And if I was an individual owner operator and I was committed to doing what I'm doing for the long run, that's where I would try to focus. There's a lot of those hands touch, like personal relationship with guests, because I don't think anybody's ever going to be able to do personal relationships at scale. Like, it's just not possible. So I do see that in the future. There's always going to be a segment of the market that is bad. But to your point, buying a used mattress, throwing it up on Airbnb and making it a cash, that's over, right? And that's never coming back. I do see AI getting a lot more involved in a lot of different ways, mostly around guest communications, but even dispatch. I can see a lot of, I don't know how far we want to go into this AI world, but I can see a lot of agents, like AI agents operating in different capacities within the short-term rental industry. So you even have like a dispatching agent who calls around to different service providers to get them to provide service at a place. I can see where like operational efficiencies for short-term rentals really increases, and we drive down the cost of operating a short-term rental, both on the portfolio level as a manager and even on the individual owner operator level. I can see some of these operating expenses coming down substantially from the implementation of AI. But I think the most important thing is maximizing impressions and maximizing conversion of those impressions into bookings. And I see the market kind of bifurcating in that, right? Either you're going to go really niche, unique, personal, hands-on host, or you're going to go like large property manager with big distribution channel that knows how to market a listing. And I think that's kind of where the market's going. Everybody in between on either side of those things, you're going to get squashed.
Yep. That's exactly where we're seeing things is I don't think that middle ground really It exists, but unfortunately, I think it's just in 5 years, it's going to be very difficult to keep up and compete with everything that's out there and how the market's professionalizing. Property managers are getting, better, and the unique stays is, starting to rise. I can see that being challenging. Plus, these companies who do have the capital to invest in marketing AI to make them more efficient, more streamlined, just a well-oiled machine. It's going to become challenging for people who are doing it themselves, clicking the button, clicking send, updating their listings themselves, compared to these companies who have automated and utilize AI to make their listings the best they possibly can be.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that that's the case. I think you're going to find that property managers, I know this is going to sound shocking right now, but I think you're going to find that property managers will be offering better service to their guests than individual owner operators in the not too distant future.
No, absolutely. And I think the point of AI, do you guys use AI in your business a good amount currently, or are you starting to like dip your toe into that space?
Yeah, so we use it a lot internally for a lot of different things. I'll give you one example. When we take over a listing, or usually when we take over a listing, either from a client who's switching from other property manager or somebody who's switching from operating themselves to hiring a manager, one of the things that we do is we will actually send the listing to one AI agent, whether it's ChatGPT or somebody else. We send the listing and we say, hey, go through all these reviews and help generate some specific things about this listing that guests really like over time. And so on the new listing description that you're building for the new listing that you're going to be marketing, you're actually pulling all of the historical benefits or things that people loved about the property that they talked about in their reviews. And you can just do it, really quickly. And so you can actually market your listing far more effectively, talking about what's in the listing that people really like. And you can experientialize it rather than stating the amenities as like facts. We do use AI on basically the inquiries. So when people inquire about booking a place or booking a stay, we have an AI agent now that responds to that rather than our guest comms team. We are working on implementing AI within our guest comms, but it's actually really complicated because of that channel distribution. It's not very simple. We can't just like plug in AI into our property management software and be off to the races. So we're actually looking at building a custom software overlay with some of our tools and using a model like ChatGPT or Grok or Gemini or whatever. I see it is very much a big focus over the next quarter, 2 quarters. We also we saw AI being a really big deal. And so something that we have really, really harped on that makes us actually, I think, really different from a lot of property managers is owning your data. And lots of property managers, the way this works, Jordan, you're not a property manager, right? Have you ever been a property manager?
We manage our properties internally, yes, but my other business partner is the property management arm of our company.
Okay, but you've never like managed, a portfolio for somebody else,
right? No,
okay,
no,
right.
No.
The reason why I ask is because generally speaking, what property managers do is they spend a lot of time looking for a PMS, a property management software that they're going to align with, and then they do everything in their PMS. But the problem is, no property management software is perfect, and you'll find that lots of property managers switch between PMSs. Actually, a great question to ask a property manager you're interviewing is, hey, how often have you switched property management softwares like in the last 5 years? Like that's a really good question to ask them because you'll learn a lot about their back-end business operation from that conversation. But I bring this up because most property managers, a vast majority, store all of their data in their PMS. Now, why does that matter? What does that relate to AI? Well, you're stuck with whatever their project schedule is, whatever their feature set that they're pursuing is as a company. You're stuck with implementing whatever it is that they come out with. You don't have any control over it. So one of the things we set out at the very beginning was owning our data. So while we use a PMS, it's not our source of truth. It's not our system of record. We use Airtable as our system of record to distribute information to a bunch of different tools. And the reason we did that, Jordan, is because we're going to implement an AI engine over our data that guests are going to be able to access. You're going to have a lot of permissioning around this, but basically guests could say, where's the electrical panel? And the AI will know to search within our system of record, where is the electrical panel for this property for this guest at this date? And do they have permission to access this information? If it's yes and yes, then the AI will just spit out the answer. And all of a sudden your guest response time goes from less than 5 minutes to like less than 1 minute. And you don't have to involve humans at all. And so we're building towards that future, that use case where a guest could ask a question, a vendor, right? A vendor could call in and say, hey, how do I access this property? I need to do an AC repair. Okay. Calls in, the AI answers and first checks, hey, do we have a work order for this property? Is this actually legitimate? Is this person supposed to be here? Okay. Is it occupied? Is there a guest here? No. Okay, great. Here's your code. All while they're on the phone with our AI accessing our system of record. That's going to happen in the next 5 years. I think much sooner than that. But you're going to start to see the importance of owning your data because of how you're going to be able to integrate AI. And if you're with the PMS and all your data is with the PMS, you're stuck on their development schedule. You're stuck on their development roadmap, and there's nothing you can do about it.
That's absolutely incredible. I've never thought about it from that perspective because everyone always preaches that, like, and obviously you realize this, your PMS is your central point. That's what connects everything together. And I think that's an old school way of thinking, to where you're thinking very futuristic in the sense of how do I leverage AI to how do I maximize and squeeze all the value out of my data as much as possible to streamline all the things that happen within my business. I think it's absolutely genius.
Yeah, I think it's the future.
Yeah, for sure it is. And we always say is, AI may not be fully mature yet, but if you don't get on board now and kind of learn some of the pieces, you're going to be far behind. You're going to be looking back 2, 5, however many years it is, and be like, oh my gosh, I should have gotten on board. I should have gotten involved and understood AI more.
I tell people, and whatever, I'm a nobody, but I tell people AI is probably the biggest thing that we'll see in our lifetime. Like, I think it's as big, if not bigger, than the internet in terms of driving productivity for the human race. Like, it is going to revolutionize our world. Like, it's unbelievable the impact it's going to have. And I don't think a lot of people realize it because they don't think about it that much, or they see ChatGPT and like, oh, this is kind of fun. They don't really like realize where it's going and what it's going to do to business. Like, it's fascinating. Like, here's an example of this. We're a growing company, but our payroll is shrinking. We're growing. We have more responsibilities, more activity, more everything, but our payroll, our staffing is going down. Well, basically in the world before AI, that wasn't possible, right? Like, that's not possible. But if you think AI first, it is possible, and it's going to be happening a lot. You're going to see productivity go up. You're going to see the amount of activity getting done, work getting done go up. At the same time, the amount of human interaction or the need for human capacity to do it going down. And I think that's a trend we're going to see over the next 10 years, and it's going to accelerate in a lot of ways that we don't yet know.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's just, whether you know how to utilize AI in your business today or not, I think there's so much value in just, learning about it, surrounding yourself with people yes, exactly. Like, you may not implement it today, but maybe you implement it in a year once you learned it, or if you work with someone who knows how to utilize it, work with a property management company who is utilizing it to maximize ROI on your properties. I think it's the way to go. And if you, like we said, if you don't get on board now, it could be not too little too late, but you're going to be behind the 8 ball come 2-3 years from now.
I agree. I'd encourage all of your audience members to spend some time learning about AI regularly. I think it's really, really important for everybody in every capacity. One other question I would tell your audience to ask if they're interviewing property managers is ask them about their data strategy. I would literally just ask them like, well, how do you handle data? Like, I know there's like a lot of random data and every property is unique. So it's kind of complicated to understand and know your property. So what's your data strategy? And just see what they say. It will be really revealing on how like forward thinking your property manager that you're talking to is.
Yeah, it's a good point. Again, data is one of those things that's been around to where everyone realizes the value of data. Unfortunately, I think a lot of people don't know how to utilize it. So finding a property management company who knows what they're doing with your data versus be like, oh yeah, your data is stored here. And they say, if you ask them that question, like, what's your data strategy? It's like, oh, to capture information and send you owners' statements, right? I think maybe there's a little bit of concern with that. So it's AI and data, two pieces I think that are extremely valuable.
Yeah, and you're going to see managers, because again, going back to the comment I made earlier, switching managers is expensive. And if you're going to own this asset over a long time, right, that's your goal, you want to look for a manager you can partner with over a long time, somebody who's going to be innovating and continuously driving value for you as the property owner, driving down those operating expenses so that they put more money in your pocket, right? That's the property manager you want to work with. And if you're going to see, I think in that bifurcation we were talking about, the professionalization of the industry, that's not just on individual owner operators having to make a decision of whether to go with a manager or go really deep themselves and be like full-time on their own path. You're going to see property managers also get bifurcated, where you're going to have the old school that's not really implementing AI. They're kind of just running things as they always have. They've got, Marge at the front desk that you call into, and she writes down your name on a piece of paper for your reservation in their little like physical, for the reservation book. And then you're going to have companies that are very AI forward, AI focused. And you're just going to see this massive divergence over time. It doesn't look very big right now, may not look very big in 6 months, but over the next 5 to 10 years, it's going to be this massive divergence in performance.
Absolutely. Well, I think you're spot on. And I think we could dive into AI and data all day long. Maybe we'll bring you back on for another episode. We can just solely focus data and AI in the world of short term. I mean, you could spend 2-3 hours talking on that topic. I think it's one of those areas that people need to become more comfortable with and don't be intimidated by I think some people do get intimidated by the word data and AI, and they're like, that's for bigger companies. I don't need to worry about that right now. I'm just trying to hit my cash on cash number, right? That's a lot of people is like, they don't even know what that, like everything that goes into that. So, but data and AI is so critical.
Well, honestly, the human brain's really, really capable. So like if you only have one property, you don't need data because your brain can actually handle that. It's when you start getting to that 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 properties, that's when it starts getting like, oh, I actually don't know what's going on exactly at every property. And you can't just keep it in your head. And the old model was you have a property manager. This is true for vacation rentals as long terms. You, Jordan, have a property manager. That property manager is responsible for everything at your property. The cleaning, the maintenance, the relationship with the owner. You have a question. Hey, how is this doing? Is the sprinkler been blown out yet for the winter? Has that been done? You call your property manager and they'll say, yep, we've done it. I've done it already. We're good to go. And that property manager would have 35, 40, 50 properties that they would just try to know as much as possible in their head what's going on their properties, because the human brain can do that. They had some assistance and that sort of thing. We are not structured that way. That's kind of an old school property management model. We are not structured that way. We are very much like a normal business with sales, operations, finance, and nobody's like one person is responsible for your property. And I think you're going to start to see, that's another great question to ask your property manager is how you're structured. Do you have a property manager who's like responsible for everything at a property, or do you have, multiple people responsible for different processes?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we got a shortcut, an easy answer for people today. And I know it's not an answer for everything, but if you are looking for a property management company, we may know someone. We may know a company, Renjoy could be an option, right?
I will say that we are pretty locked in our market. So, I'm happy to talk to your audience. If anybody has a question, let's say they're in Gatlinburg, they're in Kentucky, and they are looking for a manager, we're happy to just talk and share our thoughts and kind of help you think through your process. We're not going to manage your property in those states, but we're happy to just be a resource for you and try to drive more value for everybody who's trying to build wealth through real estate.
Yeah, no, I love that. So Jacob, final 2 questions for you of our podcast. This has been fun. I already just looked up and it's already been an hour and I'm like, man, like it's been flying. I've really enjoyed this. But the last 2 questions that we ask every guest that comes on our podcast, the first one, and I hope you're a reader. What book do you recommend to the listeners today that has had a significant impact on your journey or professional career?
Yeah, if it's okay with you, I'm going to go with an author instead of a book because he writes a lot of great stuff.
Absolutely.
Are you familiar with Cal Newport?
I've heard the name. What are some of his books he's wrote?
Oh, that's a great question. Part of the reason I'm going with an author is I can't remember the exact names. Hold on. Deep Work is probably the most influential individual book I've read. But he said, so good they can't ignore you. And he's done Deep Work. He's written a few other books, but I highly encourage your audience. He makes like pretty intellectual and really deep and insightful understandings of how humans are productive, but he makes it really accessible. And so I really encourage everybody to pick up one of Cal Newport's books. For me, it was really influential in helping me become, 10x more productive as an individual.
Yeah, no, I love that. I have, now that you say that author, I got Deep Work sitting on my shelf right over there. It's a fantastic book. And my business partner and I, we talk about it all the time, is like carving out that time for that deep work. So Cal Newport, great author. Go read Deep Work or any of his books out there.
Yeah.
The second question what is one thing that you know now that you really wish you knew when you were 20 years old?
Yeah, I wouldn't say, like there's a single fact, but one principle I wish I really understood better was there's quite a few, but one is like the it's around productivity. It's not around like understanding. Like one thing I would want to say is like compounding, understanding compound interest. Like at 20 years old, like if you master that principle at 20, you're going to be extremely wealthy. Like it doesn't really matter what you do. If you master that principle of compounding and you're saving money at 20 years old, like you're going to do really well. But that's not what I would say. I would say it's actually more around productivity and this idea, the principle of continuous improvement, and how can I accelerate that improvement cycle. I think if you're 20 years old, like if I'm talking to my 20-year-old self, I would say a lot along the lines of learn how to improve yourself as quickly as possible in a sustainable cycle. Like whatever that looks like for you at 20, learn how to continuously improve rapidly. And if you do that personally, the sky's the limit, right? You could be a billionaire, right? At 20, if you really master this principle of how do I drive accelerating personal improvement, that principle alone would just massively change your life.
I absolutely love that. It's so critical, and the continuous improvement and realizing the continuous improvement takes time. It's to your point of compounding interest, but more so compounding that improvement over time, like getting 1% better day over day and realizing it's going to take time, but figuring out how to do it in a way that streamlines you to get there as quick as possible, but also improving yourself along the way. Absolutely love it.
Can I share, I know we're over time. Can I share one thing about this that I wish I had done earlier that's related to this?
Absolutely.
In the business world, for those of you who may not be in it, we often have like scorecards or metrics or measurables on how well we're doing in our job, but we don't do that in our personal lives. And the principle of what gets measured gets improved is very true. We see it in work, we see it in our productivity, but we don't do it personally. And so one of the things that I have recently changed, I wish I had done way sooner, is this kind of scorecard with my relationships, specifically with my wife. So like I have kind of the leading indicators of how well my relationship is with my wife. So I do things like, how many dates do we go on a week, right? How often are we having a conversation about money? Or how often am I doing, quiet time or prayer time with my wife? Like how often are these things happening? They're leading indicators on the health of my relationship with my spouse. And you can do this in a lot of ways, not just in your productivity, but also in your personal development. And that's something I wish I had done when I was younger, having a personal scorecard and like really held to it and driven from kind of a measurable perspective.
That's awesome though. But the scorecard and personal life, because so many people focus on the professional side of their life, doing that personally, I think is so valuable. I love that.
I can't take credit for it. For everybody who heard this and has stayed with us this far, Clint Fiore, I believe is his name. I found him on X. He's a small business broker and he's got really good posts. I recommend the follow on x.com, Clint Fiore.
That's amazing. We'll go follow Clint. He's got all the value to create your scorecard for your life with your spouse or your wife.
That's right.
Oh, that's awesome. Well, perfect. Well, Jacob, I do sincerely appreciate you coming on the show. For everyone listening today, where can they get in touch with you or get in touch with Renjoy?
Yeah, the easiest way to do it is just jacob@renjoy.com, JACOB@renjoy.com. You can also check out our website, renjoy.com. Pretty easy.
Perfect. Fantastic. All righty. Well, that does it. Another episode of the Hideaway Show. He's Jacob Mueller. I'm Jordan Holmes. As always, thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time.